Your American system is really backward. You still don't know who your next leader will be. We Chinese have known who our leader is for a long time. As a Chinese citizen, you might go your entire life without ever touching a real ballot. However, that's not entirely accurate. I recall an experience back in college when the school organized a vote to elect our district's representative for the National People's Congress (NPC). To be honest, I went through the motions rather perfunctorily. Our teachers had told us whom to vote for, very thoughtfully, specifying a candidate we'd never met and knew nothing about. During class, our teacher essentially directed us to support this particular candidate, presenting it as an exercise in democracy. But it was hard to see it as a genuine choice, as if our participation was merely a formality. This experience was one of the few encounters many Chinese people have with what's labeled as democracy in our system. If you were to conduct a street interview asking Chinese people who their local NPC representative is, I suspect 99% of them wouldn't know. Many people have only seen a few government window clerks in their entire lives, let alone district heads or mayors. There's a profound disconnect between the people and the representatives supposedly elected to represent them. Yet every day, our government and media criticize American and Western democratic systems, consistently promoting the idea that our political system is more democratic and greater in its stability. The message is that we don't need to question the system because it's inherently superior. However, this narrative is hard to reconcile with the reality that most Chinese citizens have little to no say in decisions that affect them, whether it's at the local or national level. It reminds me of this Soviet joke. Two men, an American and a Russian, were arguing. One said, "In my country, I can go to the White House, walk to the president's office, pound the desk, and say, 'Mr. President, I don't like how you're running things in this country.' The Russian said, 'I can do that too.' Really? Yes. I can go to the Kremlin, walk into the General Secretary's office, pound the desk, and say, 'Mr. Secretary, I don't like how Reagan is running his country.'" Despite this lack of a meaningful vote at home, many Chinese people closely follow U.S. elections. It's an intriguing phenomenon that reflects the complicated relationship Chinese people have with politics. In the U.S., an election can feel like a grand spectacle, a competition of values, ideas, and often personal attacks. For some Chinese observers, this display can be entertaining, particularly when compared to the more controlled, formalized political events in China, where speeches and ceremonies follow predictable scripts and lack the raw back-and-forth of Western political debates. Watching candidates exchange criticisms feels more engaging, like witnessing a drama unfold in real time. For Chinese audiences, this level of transparency and confrontation, albeit theatrical, is a stark contrast to the state-run broadcasts we're accustomed to. A curious aspect of Chinese interest in U.S. politics is the strong support for the Democratic Party among certain segments, particularly those labeled Little Pinks, 小粉红, who are fervent nationalists and vocal supporters of the Chinese government. For these people, their preference for the Democrats is less about ideology and more about disliking specific figures, especially Donald Trump. Trump's outspoken stance on China, coupled with his initiation of a U.S.-China trade war, positioned him as a symbolic adversary in the eyes of many. It's not that the Little Pinks resonate with democratic values, rather, they see Trump as the personification of the West's hostility toward China. From their perspective, a Democrat in the White House, especially someone more willing to engage diplomatically, would mean less direct confrontation and, possibly, less tension in China-U.S. relations. The intense focus on the U.S. election among Chinese netizens creates a unique paradox. While the election may be seen as a show by American citizens accustomed to the spectacle, for some Chinese observers, it has a different allure. It's more than just a political event. It's an opportunity to watch what they consider the mighty West exposing its internal divisions and weaknesses. This fascination with American politics can sometimes feel like schadenfreude, a sense of satisfaction derived from watching another country, particularly one often viewed as a critic or rival, experience its own share of problems. Yet, what makes this especially interesting is the selectivity of attention among these nationalists. Many nationalists, including the Little Pinks, are highly attuned to negative news about the U.S., often viewing it through the lens of China's interests. Social media platforms in China amplify this by highlighting stories that emphasize dysfunction, inequality, or injustice in America. On Chinese platforms, you'll frequently see coverage of American protests, racial tensions, and political scandals, which are presented as evidence of a declining Western system. However, the same individuals who can quote detailed facts about events on the other side of the Pacific often turn a blind eye to issues within their own country. They aren't oblivious to domestic problems, they've just chosen to ignore them. This selective attention is deeply rooted in a desire to protect national pride and defend China against foreign criticism. Some Chinese citizens are genuinely proud of the economic and social progress China has made over the past few decades, and they find it difficult to acknowledge issues that might tarnish this image. Admitting to domestic problems might feel like giving ammunition to critics who question China's stability and governance. For some, it's easier to look outward and criticize perceived flaws in other nations than to confront the challenges at home. The portrayal of U.S. elections as chaotic or divisive has also been strategically utilized by Chinese state media to reinforce the supposed superiority of China's own system. From this perspective, Western-style democracy is presented as inherently flawed, inefficient, and vulnerable to manipulation. In contrast, China's system is painted as unified, stable, and capable of swift decision-making. The media narrative is designed to comfort Chinese citizens, emphasizing that the lack of direct voting rights is a small price to pay for social order and economic progress. To reinforce this point, state outlets often publish statistics and polls, sometimes of questionable validity, indicating that Chinese citizens overwhelmingly support the government and its policies. Interestingly, these tactics have succeeded to a significant extent. Many people do feel that China's stability is preferable to the perceived volatility of democratic systems. However, this acceptance can be more complex than mere approval. While some genuinely believe in the merits of China's system, others adopt this viewpoint as a coping mechanism. Without a genuine avenue for political participation, viewing the existing system as the best possible option becomes a form of psychological survival. It's easier to accept the status quo when you believe there's no alternative. Another reason for this acceptance, particularly among the older generation, is the memory of instability in China's not-so-distant past. The Cultural Revolution, famine, and political turmoil left lasting scars. For many older Chinese citizens, the stability of the current regime feels like a hard-earned luxury. They are reluctant to see it jeopardized by demands for Western-style reforms. This generational divide also fuels the enthusiasm among younger Chinese for observing foreign political systems, as younger people tend to be more open to different perspectives and are more connected to global ideas through social media and foreign content. In contrast to this pragmatism among the older generation, younger Chinese citizens tend to see the world through a more cosmopolitan lens, despite the government's attempts to regulate and control information. The internet, while filtered, offers access to global perspectives, and many young Chinese people can see beyond the state's narratives. They understand the complexity of international politics and are often aware of how their government shapes narratives to suit its agenda. For them, watching U.S. elections and following international news is a way to experience a form of political engagement that's largely inaccessible at home. While observing the election dynamics in the U.S. may be fascinating, it often highlights a sense of distance from the political process in China. For Chinese citizens, there's an underlying frustration in witnessing a level of public engagement and debate that they can only imagine experiencing. The desire for a voice, even in a small, symbolic way, is a fundamental human inclination. Watching others have that power, even imperfectly, reinforces a sense of political detachment for many Chinese. It becomes a reminder of what they cannot access, a system where public opinion has real consequences, and leaders are held accountable to the people. Perhaps this explains why, despite the ideological battles between China and the U.S., there's a continued fascination with the American political system. Chinese citizens see the flaws, the divisions, and the imperfections, but they also see something else, a society where individuals can openly express dissatisfaction, engage in debate, and question authority without fear of reprisal. This is something Chinese citizens crave at a fundamental level, even if they rarely articulate it openly. In the end, the Chinese fascination with the U.S. election reveals as much about Chinese society as it does about America. It's a complex reflection of aspiration, curiosity, and frustration. The choice to ignore domestic issues while focusing on foreign ones is not born out of ignorance, but rather a conscious or unconscious defense mechanism, a way to cope with limitations while holding on to a vision of progress. For those who dare to hope, the spectacle of the U.S. election is a reminder of the power of choice, however flawed that choice may be. And for those who criticize it, it remains a performance, a drama to be analyzed, mocked, or even dismissed. But for all, it is a symbol of a process they are denied and a power they have yet to hold. This is the paradox of modern Chinese nationalism, bound to its ideals yet captivated by the very freedoms it outwardly rejects. The fascination with American democracy is not so much about admiration as it is a window into the unfulfilled yearnings of a population grappling with its own sense of agency in a rapidly changing world. In this light, the U.S. election is more than just a distant political event. It's an ongoing story of aspiration, reflecting both a desire for voice and a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement of what remains out of reach.